The world of Abyss is ancient, older than the kingdoms, older than the gods who rule its skies, older than the stories carved into stone by civilizations long lost to dust. It is a world of magic and might, of beauty and terror, a land shaped by the wars of gods and mortals alike. And yet, despite its scars, despite its battles, despite the rise and fall of empires, Abyss endures. It always has, and it always will. It is a world of opposites, where kingdoms of light and honor stand against nations of shadow and cruelty. To the west, Magarda, the bastion of light, where knights uphold justice and scholars unlock the mysteries of creation. To the east, Raukanet, the empire of spiders, where dark sorcery festers, where Zalthek, the Spider Queen, rules from her webbed throne, whispering nightmares into the minds of the ambitious and the damned. Between them, everything. The lands of Abyss are as varied as the stars above it. The gilded deserts of the Sunfire Expanse, where the mighty genii weave their riddles and the nomads walk the shifting sands beneath an unforgiving sun. The peaks, frozen ice cold, of the Rhymfang Mountains, where ice dragons slumber in ancient dwarven halls echo with forgotten songs. The deep jungles of Zarum Kal, where the lizard folk hunters stalk prey through emerald canopies and the ruins of civilizations lost to time remain half buried beneath the roots of colossal trees. And the Forgotten Isle, where the waves whisper in unknown tongues and where even the bravest sailors dare not linger after sunset. It is a world of explorers and tyrants, of scholars and warlords, of adventurers and fools who cannot resist the call of the unknown. But Abyss is not merely a land of men and beasts. It is a land where the gods walk, where celestials and demons weave their fates into mortal affairs, where the veil of Asteros, the very boundary that separates the realm of myth from the mortal world, grows thin in places where it should remain strong. Some worship the gods of light, seeking their blessing, hoping to earn their favor. Others serve the lords of shadow, offering blood and devotion in exchange for power beyond mortal understanding. And then there are even those who do not worship at all, the ones who know their own truth, that the gods are not merciful, they are not just, they are simply another force to be reckoned with, no different than the storms that sink ships or the quakes that split the earth. Abyss is a vast, boundless, and untamed world. For every civilized kingdom, there are lands where the wild things still rule. The whalers cry woods, where the Fae courts weave their mischief, where the trees move when no one is watching. The Blightlands, where nothing grows, where the air itself is poison, and where the dead refuse to stay buried. The sunken city of Velendor, where the last king walked into the sea, and where the crown still whispers to those who dare to seek it beneath the waves. And beyond it all, there are things older than the gods themselves, creatures that watch, creatures that wait, creatures that prey upon those foolish enough to investigate them. Abyss is dangerous. It is beautiful. It is merciless. And yet, despite its dangers, despite the wars, the beasts, the gods, the terrors waiting in the dark, and everything else, the people still venture forth, not because they are foolish, not because they are blind to the risks, but because adventure is irresistible. Because the promise of glory, of riches, of power will always outweigh the warnings carved into tombstones. Because every great hero, every great villain, every name that will ever be remembered, all of them once stood at the edge of the unknown and took that first step forward. It is a world of steel and sorcery, a world of kings and criminals, a world where legends are forged, where empires rise and fall, and where the brave and the foolish venture forth into the unknown. This is Abyss, and this is just the beginning. Our first tale takes place in the city of Magarda, the Bastion of Light. There are many great cities in the world of Abyss, but none shine quite like Magarda. A city of knights and kings, of scholars and sellswords, where adventurers carve their names into legend and laws are written in steel and parchment alike. Some call it the Bastion of Light, the last great stronghold of order in an untamed world, Others call it a gilded cage, where power and corruption walk hand in hand, hidden beneath gleaming marble and polished steel. But to most, Magarda is home. As you enter the city, you first pass through the outer gates, massive structures of iron and stone manned by the Silver Guard, Magarda's elite knights. Beyond the gates, the outer city unfolds, a sprawling district of markets, workshops, and everyday life. Here, the merchants' row pulses with energy, stalls overflow with silk from the sky cities, dwarven crafted steel, enchanted jewelry from elven hands, and spices from the Sunfire expanse. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, fresh bread, and the occasional explosion of a careless alchemist's experiment. Venture deeper, and you'll find the Iron District, where blacksmiths hammer away at unbreakable blades and enchanted armor. The forges burn day and night, the streets streaked with soot and sweat as apprentices toil under the watchful eyes of their masters. This is a necessity in the city of Magarda, where adventure is one of the greatest industries. Further still, you'll find the Hearthway, where the common folk of Magarda live their quiet lives, modest homes, warm hearths, and the smell of wood smoke and fresh-baked pies drifting from open windows. Children chase each other down narrow alleys, and in the evenings the taverns light up with the sound of music, laughter, and stories of heroes long past. But beyond the inner wall, where the streets are wide and clean, where statues of past rulers watch in silent judgment, lies the true heart of Magarda. At its center, the Adventurers' Guild Hall, a fortress of oak and stone where bounty hunters, mercenaries, and aspiring legends all gather. Inside, the great quest board overflows with contracts, some mundane, such as helping dig a hole or building a barn. Some are more deadly, such as hunting down tribes of goblins and various other creatures in the deep, dark woods of the surrounding land. And some still are impossible tasks, feats of legend that no fool would take. And yet, by the end of the day, the board empties, because fools and legends are often the same thing. Magarda is not just a city of wanderers, it is a city of power. The Silverkeep Castle looms over it all, its spires reaching for the heavens, its banners whipping in the wind. King Edmar the Just rules from its halls, surrounded by nobles, advisors, and knights who swear fealty with words they may or may not mean. And in the Grand Archive of Eldin, scholars pore over ancient tomes and forbidden histories, while hooded mages whisper incantations in candlelit chambers. They seek knowledge long buried, truths that may be better left forgotten. And beneath the city, beneath the cobblestone streets and marble palaces, lies the Undershadow. The Undershadow is a hidden world of thieves, assassins, and black market merchants. Here, the law holds no weight, and coin is the only true king. In the dark corners of the black coin market, relics of questionable origins exchange hands. In the Ratway Arena, blood is spilled for sport, and in the shadows of it all, the Skeleton King watches, ruling the Thieves' Guild with a grin that never fades. Yes, Magarda is a city of light and shadow, of glory and ruin, where the strong rise and the weak are forgotten, where heroes are made and where legends begin. Welcome, one and all, to Magarda. Some seek glory, others seek riches, and there are even those who have nowhere else to turn to. But no matter what brings them, all adventurers will eventually pass through the same doors. A fortress of stone and oak, looming in the heart of Magarda, the Adventurers' Guild Hall. For those who step inside, it is a sanctuary, a proving ground, and a last chance at something greater. Inside, the air is thick with stories. A warrior leans against the bar, nursing a tankard of ale, the scars on his arms telling more than his words ever could. A sorceress in midnight robes studies a parchment, lips moving as she whispers an incantation. A half-orc smacks his fist onto the great wooden questboard, pointing at a bounty marked in blood-red ink. Everywhere you look, there are hunters, mercenaries, treasure seekers, and legends in the making. Some will rise. Many will fall. More will never return. The guild is not an army. It does not serve kings or courts. It does not fight for a crown or country. It serves the unknown. It fights against the things that should not exist. The creatures that lurk beyond the map's edge, the ruins that whisper to those who step inside, the horrors that crawl from the dark places where even the gods refuse to tread. And those who stand against such threats, they're not knights. They're not soldiers. They are adventurers. Some are seasoned warriors, blades nicked from 100 battles. Some are fresh-faced recruits, gripping their weapons like lifelines. But they all have one thing in common. They take the contract. And once a contract is signed, it must be fulfilled. The Adventurers Guild is more than a name, though. It is a city within a city, a world unto itself. In the Grand Hall, adventurers gather beneath great iron chandeliers, drinking, boasting, and spinning tales of their victories and failures. The walls are lined with banners and trophies, the skull of a slain dragon, the blackened horn of a demon, a shield once carried by a hero who never returned. And at the quest board, contracts wait like whispered challenges. Escorting a noble's caravan, low pay, easy work. A missing patrol near the Blightlands, hazard pay included. A ruin uncovered in the eastern wastes, high coin, high risk. And then there are the red-marked contracts. The ones that promise more gold than most will see in a lifetime. The ones that few ever return from. The guild is also not lawless. It has structure and it has leaders. At the top sit the guild captains, veterans of war and magic and survival. They command respect, but they do not lead through authority alone. They have walked the same roads and taken the same risks as many adventurers will take throughout their career. And they know exactly what will happen if a job goes wrong. Beneath them, the questmasters, who organize missions, payments, and logistics. The ones who decide who is ready for what contract and who is not. Then there are the guild clerks, scribes, archivists, and record keepers, drowning in ink and parchment, tracking every mission, every fallen member, every disaster that should have been avoided. And at the bottom, the adventurers themselves, the fools and the fearless, the ones who chase stories, and the ones who become them. There is no retirement plan in the Adventurers Guild. The rewards are great, the risks are greater. Some become legends, their names written in history. Some vanish, remembered only by the debts they left behind. But every morning, the doors of the guild opens again. New contracts are posted, new adventurers step forward, and the cycle continues. Because there will always be monsters in the dark. There will always be mysteries waiting to be uncovered, and there will always be those willing to answer the call. This is the Adventurers Guild, and this is where we will meet our party. A young man stands at the counter. He has brown hair trimmed short, a strong jawline, always set in determination, and amber eyes that flicker between cautious and ambitious, like a candle caught between wind and flame. He is neither noble nor common, just another soul trying to carve his name into history. He's read the epics, he's heard the songs of the great warriors of Ebis, but reality is heavier than the stories. It comes on the weight of his sword on his hip, the ache in his muscles after long days of training, the quiet creeping fear that he might not be enough. But adventure calls, and this man, he answers. He always will. Because for Sigurd, it begins with a blade, a dream, and a desperate need to prove himself. He's young, but he's not naive. His armor is well kept, but plain. His sword is sharp, but untested. In true battle, he walks with the practiced confidence of a trained swordsman. But there is some doubt beneath the surface, the quiet uncertainty of a man who has yet to earn his scars. Not too far from him sits another adventurer. There are many, many kinds of adventurers in this world. Some wield swords, some wield shields. Idara, she wields power. Magic clings to her like a second skin, a part of her. As natural as breath, as dangerous as wildfire, the air around her crackles like a storm waiting to break. She is elven. Her features are sharp, symmetrical, almost too perfect, with silver blonde hair that falls in soft waves, framing a face both beautiful and cold. Her robes are midnight blue, trimmed with silver, enchanted silk that moves like liquid when she walks. The dagger at her hip? Decorative. The real weapon is in her hands and her blood and the very essence of her being. But magic does not shape her personality, no. Idara is who she is, with or without it. Brilliant, condescending, quick-witted, and impatient. She is smarter. She is stronger. And she will make sure that everyone knows it. But beneath that arrogance, beneath the cutting remarks and exasperated sighs, there is something else. Something no one speaks of. Because power isolates you. Because magic marks you. Because being exceptional means walking alone. She has long since learned that, in this world, you are either respected or ignored. Idara chooses to be respected. Zuth is a hunter. You won't hear Zuth coming. Not until he wants you to, at least. He moves with calculated stillness, a predator's patient, his yellow eyes sharp and unblinking. A lizardfolk hunter born of the swamps and shadowed forest, raised beneath the canopy of ancient trees. Where others rely on steel, he trusts his bow, the blade, and the wisdom of the wilds. His scales are muted green, weathered by wind and rain, blending seamlessly into the underbrush. His armor is simple leather, worn but well kept, designed for silence over protection. He does not waste words. To those who don't know him, he is cold, detached, uncaring. But stillness is not absence. Silence is not ignorance. Zuth watches, he listens, and he calculates. And when the time comes to strike, he does so with unerring precision. He does not fight for glory. He does not fight for honor. He fights because he must, and because survival has never been a choice. Chapter 1. The Anomaly of Danan's Wood. Sigurd adjusted the straps on his leather cuirass, trying to ignore the bead of sweat trailing down his temple. He was standing in the heart of Magarda's Adventurers Guild, a place of legend, and instead of feeling like a man on the verge of greatness, he felt like a man who'd been given the wrong boots for battle. The guild hall bustled with noise, armed warriors haggling over contracts, robed spellcasters comparing arcane theories, and merchants bartering supplies with the quartermaster. The air smelled of stale ale, oiled leather, and burning incense from a nearby mage's experiment gone wrong. Sigurd had trained for this. He had studied maps, sparred with veterans, and memorized the monsters of Ebis. He was supposed to be ready. Then why, by the gods, did his stomach feel like it had been filled with angry hornets? The answer, of course, stood directly in front of him. At the desk in front of Sigurd sat a gruff old man with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. This was Guild Master Clerk Harvin. He is broad-shouldered, thick-necked, and perpetually unimpressed. Built more like a soldier than a scribe, his hands are calloused, his knuckles are scarred, and yet he holds a quill like a man gripping the hilt of a weapon he cannot put down. His hair is graying at the temples, and his face is lined with permanent exhaustion, and his patience non-existent. This was a man who had seen too many eager recruits march in with wide eyes and grand dreams. This was a man who had seen too many names crossed off the registry when those dreams met reality. He didn't care for pleasantries. He didn't care for excuses. His only care, that the job would get done. And if you'd wasted his time, gods help you. One moment, the guild clerk said as he waved over to two other individuals. Sigurd turned around and looked. An elf, probably a sorceress based on her garb, and a lizard folk approached. These must be his new companions, he thought. Now that you're all gathered, Harvin said, letting out a sigh, your mission, Danan's Wood. Strange activity, probably paranormal. The guild doesn't have any prior records of this sort of disturbance, he said as he rubbed his temples. We'd normally send a more seasoned group to investigate an unknown, but we're stretched thin, and this seems relatively harmless. So, congratulations, you get the mystery. What kind of strange activity exactly? Sigurd asked, straightening out his back, determined to sound professional. Harvin gave a long, suffering look, then tapped the parchment before him. Reports are conflicting. Some say people hear voices. Others say the trees move. One man claimed the sky changed colors. No injuries, no disappearances. Not yet, at least. It could be a hoax, or it could be something worth our time. The elf scoffed. Ghost stories? Excellent use of my talents. Zuth flicked his tail, his expression unreadable. Trees do not move. Men lie. Harvin sighed. Glad you're all thrilled. Your contract is signed, so you've already been paid. So now you need to solve this. And you get to get the rest if you do. Don't come back until you've got answers, at least of some form. Sigurd swallowed, nodded, and took the contract. We'll handle it. Harvin grunted. See that you do. As he turned, he noticed Idara looking him up and down. She examined him like she would her nails, as if she was bored at the very idea of having to deal with him. She flicked her unimpressed gaze at his eyes and asked, You are the swordsman, yes? Sigurd straightened. Yes. She sighed. Wonderful. A dull blade to match the dull mission. Sigurd opened his mouth and then closed it. So much for first impressions. Meanwhile, Zuth, clearly a ranger of some sort, stood with arms crossed, his yellow eyes half-lidded, radiating indifference. His scales were a dull green, his leather armor patched in places, and his massive hunting bow looked better cared for than anything else that he had on his person. He'd barely spoken a full sentence, let alone commented on anything going on. The party set out, and by midday they were already traveling down the old forest road, leaving the stone towers of Magarda behind as they entered the misty, autumn-hued woods of Danan's Wood. The path was well worn, but something about the air felt thicker than it should have been. Zuth walked ahead, his reptilian senses attuned to the wilds, scanning the path without a word. Sigurd followed, hand resting on the hilt of his iron longsword, while Idara walked just behind him, occasionally flicking her fingers to summon a small burst of silver flame, more for amusement than anything else. So, Sigurd began, trying to break the silence. First contract, huh? Zuth didn't turn. Yes. Idara smirked. And you, dear swordsman, looks like you've only held that weapon in training halls. Sigurd bristled. I've seen battle. Her bored expression didn't change. Have you? He clamped his mouth shut. They walked deeper. The trees here were tall, ancient, their branches twisting into strange shapes, as if reaching for something unseen. The forest smelled damp, a mix of wet bark and decaying leaves, but there was something else beneath it, a scent Sigurd couldn't place. And then the road ended. It didn't end in a gradual thinning of the path, nor did it end in the overgrowth of trees. There was no shortage of bricks laying, and there was certainly no end of a path marked by a sign that said, Dead end, go there. No. The path simply stopped. One moment, there was a road, and the next, flat grass, stretching out as far as the eye could see. Idara actually stopped playing with her magic for a moment. That's not normal. Zuth hissed, lowering his bow. The air here is wrong. Sigurd stepped forward, cautiously, his boot pressing into the strangely uniform grass. The sky above was clear, cloudless, blue, pure, too pure. But the light was off. Not quite warm, not quite cold. And the gold of afternoon, but it wasn't quite dusk. Then the wind shifted and the whispers began. Not words exactly, just a pressure in the ears. A sound between silence and speech, like something trying to talk but unable to form the syllable. Sigurd drew his sword, heart pounding. All right, I take it back. This isn't a ghost story. Idara furrowed her brow, her fingers already glowing with arcane energy. No, this is something else entirely. Zuth clicked his tongue and reached into his pack, pulling out a small strip of dried meat. He tossed it forward, and the moment it crossed the boundary of the old road, it vanished. Not fell, not faded, simply ceased to exist. There were no traces. There was nothing there, not even detritus. Sigurd took a slow step back. Right, so we report this, yes? Idara nodded, her usual smugness absent. Oh, absolutely. Zuth simply stared ahead, unblinking. Then, in a slow, deliberate voice, he muttered, "The trees do not move." The whispers grew louder, and from the distance, something moved in the grassless expanse, shifting, coming towards them, though it had no form, no shadow, something the guild had never seen before. The whispering sound began to swell into a chorus of unintelligible murmurs crawling through the air like fingertips across glass. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, pressing against their ears, curling at the edges of their thoughts. The thing in the grassless expanse moved, but not like a creature would. It had no shape, no weight, just a distortion, a ripple, air, heat rising off of stone, and it was coming closer. Sigurd tightened his grip on his sword. This is bad. Idara's hand sparked with arcane light, her expression grim. I second that. Zuth simply excelled, slow and measured, his bowstring creaking as he drew an arrow, aiming toward the nothingness that advanced towards them. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it stopped. The whispers faded. The pressure in the air lifted, leaving only the silence of the woods behind. The three of them stood motionless, waiting. Nothing moved. Nothing attacked. Nobody dared to even breathe as they waited for the strange absence to return. But it did not. However, the road remained cut off between their familiar world and something else. Sigurd swallowed. We are going back to report this, right? Zuth was staring at the spot where the meat strip had vanished, his tail flicked once. Yes. Idara didn't lower her hands, but her voice carried less arrogance than usual. Agreed, this is beyond us. There was a pause, and then she added, and I do not say that lightly. Zuth crouched at the boundary, his reptilian fingers pressing lightly into the strange uniform grass. His eyes flickered back and forth, scanning the unnatural divide between the woods and the expanse. Sigurd watched him uneasily. You are not thinking of stepping in there, are you? Zuth rumbled, a deep, thoughtful sound. He picked up a small rock and chucked it into the empty space. It vanished instantly, just like the strip of meat. No impact, no sound, just gone. Idara sighed, rubbing her temples. Well, that confirms it. If we step across that threshold, we may as well be walking into the abyss. Zuth finally straightened out. The air there is dead. Sigurd frowned. Meaning? Zuth's tail flicked again. No scent, no sound, no wind, like it is outside of the world. Idara folded her arms. An anomaly, not fey magic, not shadow magic, not even a conventional illusion. She clicked her tongue. And I hate not knowing things. Sigurd glanced between the two of them, and then at the empty space in front of them. He had expected something like goblins, maybe bandits, maybe even a witch. But this? No, he had not expected this. All right, he said, trying to focus on something practical. If we can't step in and we can't affect it, what's our next step? Zuth exhaled slowly. We need to find someone who can. They backtracked carefully, moving through the woods with a sense of unease that hadn't been there before. Danan's wood no longer felt like an ordinary place. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing, as if their instincts warned them to flee. Sigurd kept a tight hand on his sword. Idara muttered something about how she was not paid enough for this nonsense, and Zuth simply led the way in a silent efficiency. By the time they reached the outskirts of the wood, the afternoon sun had begun to dip towards the horizon. The sight of the distant city walls of Magarda filled Sigurd with relief. They hadn't found the source of the disturbances, but they had found something far worse, something unknown, something that couldn't be explained, and now the Adventurers Guild would have to reckon with it. The gates of Magarda loomed ahead, their iron-bound wood standing firm beneath the banners of the Adventurers Guild. The city beyond bustled with life and color, a stark contrast to the unnatural silence of Danan's wood. Sigurd had never been so relieved to hear the sounds of merchants haggling, of blacksmiths hammering, and of children laughing in the streets. Still, a weight pressed against his chest. The thing in the woods, the absence, the anomaly, the nothingness, it lingered in his mind. They had faced no monsters, no bandits, no dark sorcery, and yet somehow that empty space had been worse than any blade or spell. It had been more horrifying than any shambling horror or aberration. It was nothing. It was unknown. It was unexplainable and untenable. They made their way to the guild hall, a massive structure of stone and oak, its towering windows depicting great adventures of old and stained glass hue. The air inside was thick with the scent of oil, parchment, and sweat, the usual gathering of sellswords, mages, and treasure seekers filling the space with their usual bravado. At the far end of the hall, behind a fortress of desks and parchment, sat Master Harvin, the guild clerk. His ink-stained fingers scrawled across yet another document, and his perpetual scowl deepened when he saw them approaching. "Oh, you're back early," he put down his quill. "That's usually a bad sign." Idara crossed her arm, her midnight blue robes still speckled with dirt from the forest. "Your ghost story? It wasn't just a ghost story." Zuth clicked his tongue, tail flicking once. "The trees did not move." Harvin sighed. "Fantastic. Then what did?" Sigurd stepped forward. "Nothing." Harvin raised his eyebrow. "Come again?" Sigurd ran a hand through his brown hair, trying to find the words. The road ended, not like it was overgrown and not like the forest had taken it. Just stopped, like someone cut it from reality. There was no sound, no wind, no air, just this void. Zuth added, "Anything that crossed the boundary disappeared." Harvin frowned. "Disappeared?" Idara tapped her finger against the desk impatiently. "As in ceased to exist? A strip of meat, a rock, both gone the second they passed the threshold." Harvin's usual boredom disappeared. He leaned forward. "You're certain?" Sigurd nodded. The guild clerk exhaled through his nose and muttered something profoundly impolite under his breath. Then he pushed back from the desk and turned towards the guild captain's chambers. "This just became above your pay grade," he grumbled. The three adventurers were told to wait, which meant an hour of drinking bad ale and watching the more seasoned adventurers swap war stories. The tensions in Sigurd's chest refused to fade. He did not like not knowing what they had walked into. When they were finally called back, it was not to Harvin, but to Guild Captain Saria Everholt, one of Magarda's finest, a living legend. She was a scarred veteran, her half-plate armor polished but practical, her black hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. A well-worn greatsword rested on the table beside her. She wasn't just some administrator. She was an adventurer first, a legend second, and a commander third. Speaking to her would be a huge honor. "I've read the report," she said, her steel gray eyes unreadable. "Describe it to me again." And they did. Every detail. The cut-off road, the strange sky, the unnatural whispers. Zuth even drew a rough map on the parchment provided. Saria tapped her fingers against the table. No recorded anomalies matched this description. No fey activity, no known curses, no residual magic. Idara frowned, which means... The guild captain exhaled, which means we don't know what this is. Sigurd shifted. "So what do we do?" Saria glanced at them. "You three?" "Nothing." He frowned. "But..." She held up a hand. "You did your job. You scouted. You reported it. Now it's our turn." Zuth's tail flicked. "The guild will investigate?" Saria's jaw tightened. "We don't let unknown threats fester." She turned to Harvin. "Send word to our higher rankers. I want 3 full parties ready by dawn." Sigurd felt an odd mix of relief and unease. They'd stumbled onto something big, something even the guild didn't understand, and now there would be a much bigger investigation into it. They needed to figure out what it was. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Sigurd exhaled slowly. "Well, that was humbling." Idara stretched her arms lazily. "We did what we were paid to do." Zuth simply blinked up at the moonlit sky. The trees still did not move. Sigurd shook his head with a chuckle. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" Zuth said nothing. They made their way to the nearest tavern, the warmth of firelight and the promise of food welcoming them in. Their first mission was complete, but the mystery of Danan's Wood had only just begun.